There are stories that are whispered behind closed doors, buried under layers of secrecy and time. The story of the Evans family is one such tale, but it is not just a story, it is a reality. One that has festered and thrived in the shadows for generations. A story of blood, of betrayal, and of the consequences that linger in the corners of the world, waiting to be uncovered. Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from and at what time. This way, YouTube will continue to show you more stories like this. In the small Appalachian town of Morningside, the Evans family has always been a fixture of local legend. From the outside, their life appears simple, isolated in an old farmhouse that sits at the edge of the woods, with a sprawling plot of land untouched by time. But as the investigator, Matthew Graves, arrives in town, he senses that the rumors of strange occurrences and the family's insular ways are more than just whispers. Matthew had been assigned to investigate the mysterious deaths that had plagued the Evans family in recent months, what seemed like an isolated tragedy, with a few unexplained fatalities scattered over the years, had grown into a pattern of strange deaths and unexplained disappearances, the most recent being the death of Ethel Evans, the eldest daughter, whose body had been found hidden in the barn. The local police were baffled, but the townsfolk knew better. They had seen the signs for years. Matthew had spent days poring over police reports, uncovering a maze of family members whose names had started to fade from memory. There was an eerie sense of silence surrounding the neighbors who knew far more than they let on, but were too afraid to speak. His task was simple: uncover the truth about Ethel's death. But as he stepped foot into Morningside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this case was far from simple. The farmhouse stood at the end of a long, twisting road, the house itself a dark silhouette against the dying light of evening. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting wood. The creaking of the porch a welcome to the investigator's arrival. The door swung open slowly, revealing a dimly lit interior. In the distance, through the cracked windows, he could make out the figure of someone watching him from within. Inside, Matthew was greeted by the family's matriarch, Alma Evans, an old woman whose face was as weathered as the house itself. Her pale eyes, sunken deep in their sockets, gave away nothing but a sense of profound silence, a silence that seemed to have settled in the very bones of this house. "Can I help you, Mr. Graves?" she asked in a voice that was as brittle as the autumn leaves scattered across the porch. "I'm here about Ethel," Matthew replied, his voice steady but his mind racing. "I understand she passed recently. There are some things I need to ask about her death." Alma nodded slowly, her frail hands clutching the worn edges of her shawl. "Ethel? Yes, she was our girl, but she was never like the others. You know, never like the rest of us." Matthew felt a shiver crawl down his spine at the way she spoke, like Ethel was already a memory, already lost to time. As Alma led him further into the house, the investigator noticed the odd silence in the air. No sounds of footsteps, no hum of life, nothing but the faint creak of the old floorboards beneath their feet. The house was unnervingly still. The family members Matthew had read about were either absent or hidden away. There was no sign of them, but he could feel their presence in the thick, musty air. He was being watched, and not just by Alma. "I know what you're looking for," Alma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But there are things you may not want to uncover. Things that are better left buried." Matthew's gaze shifted to a dusty family portrait on the wall. The Evans family, a father, a mother, and their children all staring back at him with hollow eyes, their faces obscured by the years of decay. The portrait was faded, but there was one thing that stood out among them, one detail that sent an icy chill through his chest. The father, who had been missing for years, stood beside his daughter Ethel, and in the portrait, they were far too close, their faces disturbingly intimate. The realization hit him suddenly. The air around him felt thicker, heavier. The air was thick with something that didn't belong. "Alma," Matthew began, his voice shaking ever so slightly. "What happened to your husband? And what about your children?" Alma's face shifted just a slight change, but it was enough for Matthew to see the flicker of something dark, something that wasn't entirely human. "You should leave, Mr. Graves," Alma whispered, her eyes now wide and glistening with a strange intensity. "Before it's too late, before you learn the truth." Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the back of the house, followed by frantic whispers. Alma's grip tightened on her shawl, her frail form shaking, and Matthew's heart began to pound in his chest. The quiet in the house was no longer just eerie. It was suffocating. He could feel something building, something waiting to be revealed. Matthew turned toward the noise, instinctively moving toward the source, his hand reaching for his flashlight as he pushed through the darkened halls. But before he could reach the door, a voice stopped him in his tracks. "Don't open it," Alma pleaded. "What you'll find will change everything. It's not just the family that's cursed, it's the land." Matthew hesitated. There was so much he needed to understand, but the weight of Alma's warning hung in the air, oppressive and suffocating. But it was already too late. The darkness of the farmhouse enveloped Matthew. As the weight of Alma's words hung in the air like a heavy fog, he could feel the pulse of the house, as if it were alive, breathing, waiting for something or someone to uncover its secrets. But Matthew had already come this far. He couldn't turn back now. The cracks in the family's history were too wide to ignore, and the truth beckoned like an unseen hand. The noise from the back of the house continued to echo through the hallways, a muffled cacophony that set Matthew's nerves on edge. He made his way toward the source, his footsteps soundless on the creaking floorboards. As he neared the door, he could hear hushed voices, whispers too faint to make out. When he reached it, he hesitated for a moment, knowing full well that whatever was behind it would reveal something far darker than he was prepared for. With a deep breath, Matthew turned the doorknob. The room beyond was dim, with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows across the space. As his eyes adjusted, he saw what had caused the disturbance, a collection of family portraits scattered across the floor, faces obscured by scratches and gouges. But it wasn't the portraits that grabbed his attention. It was the man standing in the center of the room, a tall, gaunt figure, his clothes dirty and torn, with eyes that seemed to see through Matthew. The man's face was eerily familiar, but there was something wrong, too familiar, too close. He was one of the Evans family, but his presence here, in this room, sent a shockwave through Matthew's mind. The man's expression was vacant, yet there was a flicker of something dark beneath the surface. "What's your name?" Matthew asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though the strange feeling in his chest told him this encounter was far from ordinary. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared blankly at Matthew, his gaze empty and distant. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "I'm Noah, but you won't find the answers here. You'll find them in the woods." Before Matthew could respond, the man turned and walked toward the back door, disappearing into the night without another word. Confused, Matthew stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The name Noah sent a ripple of unease through him. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Was he one of the missing family members, or was he something else entirely? The questions piled up in his mind, but the one thing that stood out was the mention of the woods. Matthew didn't waste any time. He knew that the answers lay beyond the walls of the farmhouse. Grabbing his flashlight, he stepped outside into the cool night air. The land surrounding the house was dense with trees, their skeletal branches reaching out like claws in the dim light. The darkness seemed to swallow him whole as he made his way toward the woods. As he walked deeper into the forest, the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot, the only thing breaking the silence. He couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching him. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig, made his heart race faster. His flashlight flickered as he walked, casting long, erratic shadows that seemed to dance at the edges of his vision. The deeper he went, the colder it became. The trees pressed closer together, their twisted limbs blocking out what little moonlight filtered through. The oppressive silence of the woods was almost suffocating, and Matthew found himself struggling to shake the feeling that he had entered a different world entirely, one where the rules of reality didn't seem to apply. Ahead of him, there was a clearing, a strange, almost unnatural light glowed faintly at its center, casting an eerie, golden hue over the ground. As Matthew stepped into the clearing, he could see something that made his blood run cold. In the middle of the clearing, there was a large, gnarled tree, its trunk twisted in unnatural ways, its bark cracked and twisted like veins. Around it, a circle of stones had been carefully arranged, as though marking a sacred space. But it wasn't the tree that caught his attention. It was the bodies. at least a dozen, their faces obscured by the twisted angles of their necks, all lying around the base of the tree. They were not just dead. They were grotesque, deformed in ways that were impossible to describe. Some had limbs that bent at odd angles. Others had faces that seemed too swollen to be human. But what stood out the most was the way they were positioned, their bodies arranged in a circle, as though they had been placed here intentionally, bound by an unseen force. Matthew stumbled backward, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. His mind raced to process what he was seeing. These were the missing members of the Evans family, but they were not just victims. They were something far more twisted. They were the result of the inbreeding, the very legacy that Alma had warned him about. He dropped to his knees, his stomach turning as the weight of the discovery crashed down on him. These bodies were not just victims of some tragic event. They were symbols of a family cursed by its own blood. The truth was more horrific than he could have ever imagined, and there was still so much left to uncover. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the shadows, emerging from the trees with slow, deliberate steps. It was Noah. His eyes were darker now, almost black, as though the very act of walking through the woods had changed him. "You've seen them now," Noah said, his voice hollow. "The family, it's all coming to an end. But there's one thing you don't know, one final truth that will shatter everything you thought you understood." Matthew's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he wasn't sure whether to run or to listen, but his curiosity, his need to uncover the truth, pushed him forward. He couldn't stop now. "What truth?" Matthew asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Noah smiled, but it wasn't a smile of reassurance. It was the grin of someone who had long since lost hope. "You think you know what happened to the family, but you don't. The real horror is not the blood that binds us. It's the blood that controls us." The words hung in the air, heavy with a truth that seemed to pierce the very soul of the land. The blood that controls us. Noah's words echoed in Matthew's mind, like a mantra. As he struggled to understand what he had just heard, the moonlight had now completely vanished, leaving him in total darkness, save for the eerie glow emanating from the twisted tree behind him. Noah's eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity as he stepped closer. "What you've seen here, Graves, is just the beginning. The family's legacy, the inbreeding. The horrors you've uncovered, it's not just physical, it's psychological. The blood ties go deeper than you think." Matthew swallowed hard, his throat dry and tight with fear. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" His voice cracked, barely above a whisper, as his flashlight flickered one last time, casting strange shadows on the forest floor. Noah took a step back, his figure merging with the shadows as if he were a part of them. "They never wanted you to know. The family, they've kept this secret for generations. But now, it's all unraveling. The bloodline, it's been tainted, twisted beyond repair. And it doesn't just affect those born of it. It affects everyone who comes into contact with it." Matthew's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle starting to click together, but each new revelation seemed more terrifying than the last. The family's strange behavior, the odd deformities, the long-held silence, it was all connected. He had seen it in the bodies at the clearing. Each one of those grotesque figures had been born of that same twisted bloodline. But why? Matthew breathed, his voice barely audible against the night. Why keep it hidden? Noah's eyes seemed to darken even further, his face a mask of sorrow and something far darker, something ancient. Because once the blood is spilled, once the truth is known, there's no going back. It's the curse of our ancestors. It started long before the first Evans was born, before this house was built. It's not just about incest or inbreeding. It's about a legacy that binds us to something far worse than we can understand. Matthew's heart pounded in his chest. The air seemed to grow colder, thick with the sense that the very ground beneath him was alive, not with life, but with death. He took a step back, but Noah held out a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "You think you're safe, don't you? You think you can walk away from this, but you can't. None of us can. We are all tied to this place, to this land. The bloodline may have died, but the curse never will." Matthew's eyes darted to the bodies once again. Each face, each deformity, seemed to look back at him with eyes full of accusation. They were trapped in time, trapped in their own suffering. And now he was caught in it too. Noah's smile was twisted, not of malice, but of something far more unsettling resignation. It's too late to save yourself. It's too late to undo what has been done. The truth is, we are all part of the same bloodline, part of the same curse. And when you learn the final truth, when you see what lies beneath the surface, you'll understand why it's better to remain in the dark. Suddenly, a loud noise shattered the silence. It was the crack of a tree branch snapping, a violent force that caused the ground to tremble beneath them. Matthew's body went rigid, his pulse quickening. Without warning, the wind picked up, howling through the trees, carrying with it an unsettling sound, a whispering, a murmuring, almost as if the forest itself was alive. He turned to face Noah, but the man had already disappeared into the shadows, as though swallowed by the night itself. The words lingered in the air, as chilling as the cold that now settled in the clearing. Matthew stood alone, surrounded by the twisted remnants of a family that had been lost to time, their secrets more horrifying than anything he had ever imagined. As the wind died down, he heard it again, the whispering. This time, it was clearer. It was a voice, calling out to him from the darkness. "Come closer," it said, a voice that sent a shiver through his very soul. "Come closer and see the truth," without thinking. Matthew took a step forward. He couldn't help it. The compulsion to know more, to understand the full scope of what had happened here, was overwhelming. Every instinct told him to run, to get as far away from this place as possible, but his feet moved of their own accord, bringing him closer to the center of the clearing. As he reached the tree, he could see what lay before him more clearly. The stones arranged in a circle were not random. They formed a symbol, one that was both ancient and familiar, a symbol of a bloodline that had crossed into something far darker. The tree at the center of the circle wasn't just twisted, it was alive in a way that felt wrong, unnatural. Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence once again, but this time, it wasn't Noah's, it was Alma's. "Do you understand now, Matthew?" Her voice echoed in his mind, sharp and urgent. "The bloodline is not just ours, it never was. It belongs to something older, something far older than any of us." Matthew froze. His breath caught in his throat. The last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. He wasn't just investigating a family. He wasn't just uncovering the legacy of inbreeding. He was standing at the very heart of an ancient curse, one that had been passed down through the ages, a curse that had no end, no escape, and now he was part of it. The realization hit Matthew like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. The curse that had plagued the Evans family for generations, the darkness that had festered in their bloodline, was not just a consequence of their actions, it was a force beyond their control. And now, it had taken hold of him as well. His thoughts raced in a frenzy as he tried to make sense of everything. The grotesque bodies, the strange symbols, the whispers of something ancient and malevolent. It all pointed to a truth that was too horrifying to accept, yet too undeniable to ignore. The bloodline of the Evans family was not just a chain of suffering, it was the manifestation of something far older, something that had been passed down, generation after generation, not as a curse, but as a dark inheritance, a power that had corrupted not only the family, but the land itself. Matthew could feel it now, the weight of the curse bearing down on him, tightening like a vice. The air grew colder, the very ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as though the earth itself was alive, watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. The wind howled again, whipping through the trees, carrying with it the sound of footsteps that didn't belong to him. He spun around, his flashlight casting frantic shadows across the clearing, but he couldn't see anything. The night had become a living thing, a maze of darkness that twisted and turned, disorienting him at every step. A figure emerged from the trees. It was Noah again, his presence as unsettling as ever. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him, emerging from the shadows, were other members of the Evans family, the ones Matthew had seen in the photographs, the ones who had been lost to time. They were no longer just people. They were something else, something grotesque. Their bodies deformed in ways that defied nature. Their faces were twisted in expressions of agony, as though they had been trapped in some inescapable nightmare for eternity. Matthew's heart pounded in his chest as he took a step back. His body trembling with fear, he wanted to run, to escape the nightmare that was unfolding before him, but his legs refused to move. The family, or what was left of them, had him surrounded, their hollow eyes fixed on him with a terrifying intensity. He could hear them breathing, a low, raspy sound, as though they were in the process of suffocating, trapped in the very air they had created. Noah's voice cut through the silence, calm and measured, as though this moment had been anticipated for a long time. "You don't understand yet, do you? Graves, this family, this bloodline, it's not just cursed. It's been bound by something older, something that we were never meant to uncover. The curse didn't start with us. It started with them." He gestured to the figures standing behind him, the long-forgotten members of the Evans family, their bodies marked by time and deformity. They moved closer, their movements slow and deliberate, their eyes locked on Matthew with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "They knew the truth," Noah continued, his voice now a low, chilling whisper. "They were the first to be touched by it, the first to feel its pull. But they didn't want to share it. They wanted to keep it buried, locked away, hidden from the world. They thought they could escape it. But we are all part of the same chain now." Matthew tried to make sense of Noah's words, but his mind was a haze of confusion and dread. There was no denying it anymore. The Evans family's legacy was not just a matter of inbreeding, of physical deformities and hidden secrets. It was a darkness that had infected them all, a force that had passed down through the generations, leaving nothing untouched. And now, it had consumed him as well. "You think you're different, don't you?" Noah's voice was almost mocking now. "You think you're immune to it, but you're just like the rest of us. You've seen the truth, and now it's in your blood too." Matthew's knees buckled beneath him as the full weight of the realization crushed down on him. He was part of it now. The curse had already seeped into his very being, just as it had with every other member of the Evans family. He could feel it, deep within his chest, a pulsating, insistent thrum that seemed to echo through his veins. His body betrayed him, growing weak and unsteady, as though the curse were slowly taking hold, tightening its grip. The family members stepped forward, their movements unnaturally slow, but their eyes were fixed on him with a hunger that made Matthew's blood run cold. He tried to speak, to protest, but the words caught in his throat, trapped by a force he couldn't comprehend. Noah reached out, his cold fingers brushing Matthew's arm, sending a jolt of icy terror through his body. "It's too late," Noah whispered, his voice soft and insistent. "We're all bound together, you and me, just like them. You've seen the truth now, and it's only a matter of time before it consumes you, too." The air around them seemed to grow denser, heavier, as if the very atmosphere were thickening with the weight of the curse. The trees around them groaned and creaked, their limbs twisting and contorting as though they were reaching for Matthew, trying to pull him deeper into the heart of the darkness. Suddenly, the ground beneath Matthew's feet gave way, as though the earth itself had decided to swallow him whole. He stumbled, his body pitching forward, but something or someone caught him. He looked up, and his gaze met the eyes of the family members who surrounded him. They were no longer human, not entirely. Their faces had become masks of agony and despair, their bodies malformed by something far darker than inbreeding. They had become vessels of something ancient and cursed, something that could never be undone. Matthew realized, in that final moment, that there was no escaping the legacy of the Evans family. It was not just in their blood, it was in the very land that they had inhabited, the very air they had breathed. It was the price they had paid for their silence, for their attempts to bury the truth. And now, it was his price to pay. The earth beneath Matthew trembled, the ground giving way beneath his feet like sand slipping through an hourglass. His body, weighted down by the curse, seemed to resist his every move. His breath came in shallow gasps as the unnatural presence surrounding him grew stronger, suffocating him. He could no longer tell where the air ended and the earth began. The boundaries of reality had blurred, and he was trapped in a world that had lost all sense of time and space. The twisted forms of the Evans family surrounded him, their deformed faces frozen in expressions of unimaginable torment. Their eyes, hollow and glassy, seemed to pierce through his very soul, pulling him deeper into their shared agony. They were not just victims, they were something else entirely, trapped in a cycle of torment that would never end. And now, they were pulling him into it too. Noah, the last living member of the family, stood in front of him, his expression solemn, almost mournful. "This is what we've become," he said, his voice distant, almost detached. "The curse has taken us all, and now it will take you. You cannot escape it. Matthew, it is in your blood now. It has always been in our blood." Matthew wanted to scream, to fight back, but the words died on his tongue. The weight of the curse was too strong, too overwhelming. His body felt as though it were being crushed beneath the invisible weight of history, of generations that had suffered and bled in the name of an ancient, unknowable force. And now, that force had claimed him. The trees around him began to shift, their gnarled branches twisting and writhing like snakes, closing in on him from all sides. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with an eerie, unnatural rhythm. The clearing had become a prison, a trap from which there was no escape. The wind howled like 1,000 mournful voices, carrying with it the whispers of the long dead, the echoes of those who had lived and suffered before. "Why?" Matthew gasped, his voice weak and hoarse. "Why has this happened? What is the truth?" Noah's gaze softened, his eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to transcend time. "The truth, Matthew, is that we were never meant to live. We were born of a legacy that was never ours to claim. The blood that runs through our veins is not just ours. It is the blood of something older, something that has shaped this land long before the first Evans was born." Matthew's head spun as the words sank in. The curse wasn't just a family tragedy, it was something much older, something that had infected the very land they had lived on, the earth itself, shaping their fates in ways they could never have understood. It was a curse that had crossed time, passed down through generations, consuming them all, body, mind, and soul. "Do you see it now?" Noah continued, his voice low and almost reverent. "The bloodline is not just a family history, it's a part of the land itself, tied to the soil, to the earth, to the very roots of the trees you see around you. We are bound by something that was here long before we ever arrived. And when the blood of the Evans family mixed with the soil, it created a bond that can never be undone." Matthew's mind reeled as the implications of Noah's words crashed down on him. The land, the earth, the blood. It was all connected in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. This place, this cursed land, had been the foundation of their existence, the source of their torment. And now, he was a part of it. "But what does it want from us?" Matthew asked, his voice barely a whisper, filled with fear and confusion. Noah's eyes darkened as he took a step closer. "It doesn't want anything from us," he said, his voice cold. "It doesn't need us. We are merely vessels for its power. We were born into this, forced to live with it, forced to carry its burden, and when it is ready, it will claim us all one by one." Matthew's stomach churned as the truth sank in. There was no escape, no way out. He was trapped just like the rest of them. The curse would never end. It would continue to consume anyone who dared to step onto this land, anyone who came into contact with the bloodline of the Evans family. And now, it had claimed him. The trees around them creaked and groaned as the darkness seemed to close in tighter, a suffocating presence that threatened to swallow them whole. The ground beneath Matthew's feet shifted once more, and suddenly, he was no longer standing in the clearing. The world around him had dissolved into darkness, a void of nothingness that stretched on forever. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the faint whispers of the long dead echoed in his ears, calling to him, pulling him deeper into the abyss. He felt the familiar tug of the curse, its invisible hand reaching out for him, wrapping around his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. He wanted to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. His body was no longer his own. It had become part of the curse, part of the land, part of the bloodline that would never die. "Do you see now, Matthew?" Noah's voice echoed through the darkness, distant and haunting. "Do you see what we are, what we've always been?" Matthew's vision blurred as the darkness swallowed him whole. The curse had claimed him, just as it had claimed the rest of the Evans family. There was no escape from this legacy, no way to break free from the cycle of suffering and death. He was a part of it now, bound to the land, to the blood, to the family that had never truly been alive, as the darkness closed in. Matthew's last thought was not one of fear, but of resignation. The family, the bloodline, the curse that would never end. It would live on, long after they were gone, continuing its endless, horrifying cycle. The land was quiet once again, save for the whispering wind that rustled the leaves of the twisted trees. The cycle had begun anew. Matthew Graves, once an investigator seeking answers, had become another part of the Evans family's cursed history. His body, his mind, and his soul had been claimed by the land, just as all those before him had been. In the distance, Alma Evans stood at the edge of the clearing, her hollow eyes fixed on the place where Matthew had vanished. The curse had been passed on to him, just as it had passed to every other soul who had crossed into the Evans family's twisted legacy. She knew what had happened to him, but it was too late for him now. It was too late for them all. As the night settled into silence, the land seemed to sigh, a breath that echoed through the trees, through the earth, through the very blood that ran beneath it. The curse of the Evans family was eternal, a dark and twisted legacy that could never be broken. And somewhere, deep within the darkness, the whispers of the long dead continued, carrying with them the last words of the Evans family, words that would never be forgotten, never truly silenced.